Episode 20. The hidden battle between ego and self. Every human being lives with an internal conflict. A conflict so common that most people never notice it, yet it influences decisions, relationships, ambitions, fears, and the direction of an entire life. Carl Jung believed this conflict exists between two powerful forces within the psyche: the ego. At first glance, these words sound familiar. People use the word ego constantly, usually as an insult. Someone becomes arrogant, someone seeks attention, someone acts selfishly, and immediately people say, that's their ego. But Jung's understanding of the ego was far more complex. To Jung, the ego is not arrogance. The ego is the center of conscious awareness. It is the part of your mind that says, I. It is the identity you experience every day, your memories, your beliefs, your opinions, your personal story. Without the ego, conscious life would be impossible. The ego organizes experience, creates continuity, allows you to function in the world. The ego is necessary. The problem begins when the ego mistakes itself for the whole person. Imagine a king ruling a vast kingdom. One day, the king becomes convinced that the kingdom exists only within the walls of his palace. He forgets the forests, the rivers, the villages, the mountains, the people living beyond his sight. His understanding becomes limited. Yet he still believes he knows everything. Jung believed the ego often behaves the same way. The ego sees only a small part of the psyche, yet assumes it represents the entire personality. This illusion creates conflict, because beyond the ego exists something much larger, something Jung called the self. The self is one of Jung's most profound ideas. It represents the totality of the psyche, the conscious and unconscious combined, the complete person. Not the person you think you are, the person you actually are, including all the hidden parts, the forgotten parts, the rejected parts, the potential parts. The self is larger than the ego, much larger. If the ego is the captain of a ship, the self is the entire ocean. If the ego is a single room, the self is the entire house. Most people live almost entirely through the ego. They focus on achievements, reputation, status, image. They build an identity, protect it, defend it, strengthen it. Yet something strange often happens. The stronger the ego becomes, the more disconnected the individual sometimes feels. The self wants wholeness. The ego wants control. The self wants integration. The ego wants safety. The self wants growth. And growth often requires uncertainty. Imagine a person who sees themselves as intelligent. Their entire identity revolves around being smart. They avoid situations where they might fail, avoid learning new skills, avoid appearing ignorant. The ego protects the image. Meanwhile, growth stops, because growth requires vulnerability. The ego fears vulnerability. The self requires it. This tension exists everywhere. The ego wants approval. The self wants authenticity. The ego wants comfort. The self wants meaning. The ego wants validation. The self wants truth. Neither side is entirely wrong. The ego serves an important purpose. Without it, daily life becomes difficult. The danger appears when the ego becomes dominant, when it refuses to listen, when it refuses to grow, when it refuses to acknowledge the existence of deeper forces. Jung observed this repeatedly. People would spend years constructing successful identities. They would become respected, admired, accomplished. Yet internally, they felt empty, restless, lost, not because they lacked success, because they lacked connection to the self. The deeper personality had been ignored. Many midlife crises emerge from this conflict. The ego achieves its goals. The career succeeds, the money arrives, the status improves, yet satisfaction remains temporary. A strange question appears. Is this all there is? The question is not a sign of failure. It is often a sign that the self is demanding attention. The deeper personality wants more than achievement. It wants meaning, purpose, integration, wholeness. This is why external success alone rarely creates lasting fulfillment. The ego can be satisfied by achievements. The self requires something deeper. Jung believed dreams often reveal this conflict. The unconscious frequently challenges the ego through symbols and stories. A dream may expose fears the ego ignores, desires the ego denies, truths the ego avoids. The unconscious continually attempts to balance the personality. The self seeks completion, even when the ego resists. One of the greatest obstacles to this process is identification. People become identified with their jobs, their wealth, their intelligence, their beliefs, their political views, their social status. The identity becomes rigid. Any challenge feels threatening. Any criticism feels personal. The ego becomes fragile, not because it is weak, because it is incomplete. The more a person identifies with a limited image, the more vulnerable they become. Jung believed true psychological growth requires expanding beyond the ego, not destroying it, not rejecting it, transcending it, seeing it as one part of a much larger whole. This realization creates humility, because the individual recognizes how much remains unknown, how much remains unconscious, how much remains unexplored. Humility opens the door to growth. Arrogance closes it. The individuated person does not eliminate the ego. They place it in proper perspective. The ego becomes a servant, not a dictator, a guide, not a ruler. This allows dialogue between consciousness and the deeper self, a dialogue that gradually produces wisdom. Many people spend their lives trying to strengthen the ego. Very few spend their lives understanding the self. Yet according to Jung, the second task is far more important, because the self contains the blueprint for wholeness, the direction toward meaning, the possibility of integration, the path toward authenticity. The ego asks, how can I succeed? The self asks, who am I becoming? The ego asks, how do others see me? The self asks, who am I when nobody is watching? The ego asks, how can I avoid failure? The self asks, what must I learn? These questions lead in very different directions. One seeks image. The other seeks truth. One seeks protection. The other seeks growth. One seeks approval. The other seeks meaning. The battle between ego and self never completely disappears. It remains part of human life, part of human development, part of psychological growth. The question is not whether the conflict exists. The question is which voice you choose to follow. Because every major decision strengthens one side or the other. Every act of honesty strengthens the self. Every act of self-deception strengthens the ego. Every moment of awareness strengthens the self. Every moment of denial strengthens the ego. And over time, those choices shape an entire life. In the end, Jung believed psychological maturity begins when a person realizes they are more than their ego, more than their identity, more than their achievements, more than their reputation. They are part of something larger, something deeper, something more complete, the self. And the journey toward that realization may be the most important journey a human being can ever take.